Section 15 of The Story of the Trapper by Agnes Christina Laut. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ted Leinhart. Chapter 15, Koot and the Bobcat. Old whaling ships that tumble round the world and back again from coast to coast over strange seas hardly ever suffer any of the terrible disasters that are always overtaking the proud men of war and swift liners equipped with all that science can do for them against misfortune. Ask an old salt why this is, and he will probably tell you that he feels his way forward, or else that he steers by the same chart as that, jerking his thumb sideways from the wheel towards some seagull careening over the billows, a something that is akin to the instinct of wild creatures warning them when to go north for the summer, when to go south for the winter, when to scud for shelter from coming storm, guides the old whaler across chartless seas. So it is with the trapper. He may be caught in one of his great steel traps and perish on the prairie. He may run short of water and die of thirst on the desert. He may get his pack horses tangled up in a valley where there is no game, and be reduced to the alternative of destroying what will carry him back to safety or starving with a horse still under him before he can get over the mountains into another valley. But the true trapper will literally never lose himself. Lewis and Clark rightly merit the fame of having first explored the Missouri-Columbia route, but years before the Louisiana Purchase, free trappers were already on the Columbia. David Thompson of the Northwest Company was the first Canadian to explore the lower Columbia, but before Thompson had crossed the Rockies, French hunters were already ranging the forests of the Pacific slope. How did these coasters of the wilds guide themselves over prairies that were a chartless sea and mountains that were a wilderness? How does the wavy know where to find the rush-grown inland pools? Who tells the caribou mother to seek refuge on islands where the water will cut off the wolves that would prey on her young? Something which may be the result of generations of accumulated observation guides the wavy and the caribou. Something which may be the result of unconscious inference from a time life of observation guides the man. In the animal, we call it instinct. In the man, reason. And in the case of the trapper tracking pathless wilds, the conscious reason of the man seems almost merged in the automatic instinct of the brute. It is not sharp-sightedness, though no man is sharper of sight than the trapper. It is not acuteness of hearing, though the trapper learns to listen with the noiseless stealth of the pencil-eared lynx. It is not touch, in the sense of tactile contact, any more than it is touch that tells a suddenly awakened sleeper of an unexpected noiseless presence in a dark room. It is something deeper than the tabulated five senses, a sixth sense, a sense of feel, without contact, a sense on which the whole sensate world writes its records as on a palimpsest. This palimpsest is the trapper's chart, this sense of feel, his weapon against the instinct of the brute. What part it plays in the life of every ranger of the wilds can best be illustrated by telling how Koot found his way to the fur post after the rabbit hunt. When the midwinter lull falls on the hunt, there is little use in the trapper going far afield. Moose have yarded up, bear have holed up, and the beaver are housed till dwindling stores compel them to come out from their snow-hidden domes. There are no longer any buffalo for the trapper to hunt during the lull. But what buffalo formerly were to the hunter, rabbit are today. Shields and teepee covers, moccasins, caps and coats, thongs and meat, the buffalo used to supply. These are now supplied by waboos, little white chap, which is the Indian name for rabbit. And there is no midwinter lull for waboos. While the little white chap runs, the long-haired, owlish-eyed lynx of the northern forest runs too. So do all the lynx's feline cousins, the big yellowish cougar of the mountains slouching along with his head down and his tail lashing, and a footstep as light and sinuous and silent as the motion of a snake. The short-haired Lucifer, gorging himself full of little white chaps and stretching out to sleep on a limb in a dapple of sunshine and shadow so much like the Lucifer's skin not even a wolf would detect the sleeper. The bunchy bobcat bounding and skimming over the snow for all the world like a bouncing football done up in gray fur. All members of the cat tribe running wherever the little white chaps run. So when the lull fell on the hunt, and the mink trapping was well over, and marten had not yet begun, Koot gathered up his traps, and getting a supply of provisions at the fur post, crossed the white wastes of prairie to lonely swamp ground, where dwarf elder and willow and cottonwood and poplar and pine grew in a tangle. A few old logs dovetailed into a square made the wall of a cabin. Over these he stretched the canvas of his teepee for a roof at a sharp enough angle to let the heavy snowfall slide off from its own weight. Moss chinked up the logs. Snow banked out the wind. Pine boughs made the floor, 2 logs with pine boughs, a bed. An odd-shaped stump served as chair or table, and on the logs of the inner walls hung wedge-shaped slabs of cedar to stretch the skins. A caribou curtain or bearskin across the entrance completed Koot's winter quarters for the rabbit hunt. Koot's genealogy was as vague as that of all old trappers hanging round fur posts. Part of him, that part which served best when he was on the hunting field, was Ojibwe. The other part, which made him improvise logs into chair and table and bed, was white man, and that served him best when he came to bargain with a chief factor over the pelts. At the fur post he attended the Catholic mission. On the hunting field, when suddenly menaced by some great danger, he would cry out in the Indian tongue words that meant, "O Great Spirit," and it is altogether probable that at the mission and on the hunting field, Koot was worshipping the same being. When he swore, strange commentary on civilization, he always used white man's oaths, French patois or straight English. Though old hermits may be found hunting alone through the Rockies, Idaho, Washington, and Minnesota, trappers do not usually go to the wilds alone, but there was so little danger in rabbit snaring that Koot had gone out accompanied by only the mongrel dog that had drawn his provisions from the fort on a sort of toboggan sleigh. The snow is a white page on which the wild creatures write their daily record for those who can read. All over the white swamp were little deep tracks. Here, holes as if the runner had sunk. There, padded marks as from the bound of something soft. Then again, where the thicket was like a hedge with only one breach through, the footprints had beaten a little hard rut walled by the soft snow. Koot's dog might have detected a motionless form under the thicket of spiny shrubs, a form that was gray almost to whiteness and scarcely to be distinguished from the snowy underbrush but for the blink of a prism light, the rabbit's eye. If the dog did catch that one telltale glimpse of an eye which a cunning rabbit would have shut, true to the training of his trapper master, he would give no sign of the discovery except perhaps the pricking forward of both ears. Koot himself preserved as stolid a countenance as the rabbit playing dead or simulating a block of wood. Where the footprints ran through the breached hedge, Koot stooped down and planted little sticks across the runway till there was barely room for a weasel to pass. Across the open he suspended a looped string hung from a twig bent so that the slightest weight in the loop would send it up with a death jerk for anything caught in the tightening twine. All day long Koot goes from hedge to hedge, from runway to runway, choosing always the places where natural barriers compel the rabbit to take this path and no other, traveling if he can in a circle from his cabin so that the last snare set will bring him back with many a zigzag to the first snare made. If rabbits were plentiful, as they always were in the fur country of the north except during 1 year in 7, when an epidemic spared the land from a rabbit pest, Koot's circuit of snares would run for miles through the swamp. Traps for large game would be set out so that the circuit would require only a day. But where rabbits are numerous, the foragers that prey, wolf and wolverine and lynx and bobcat, will be numerous too, and the trapper will not set out more snares than he can visit twice a day. Noon, the Indian's hour of the short shadow, is the best time for the first visit. Nightfall, the time of no shadow at all, for the second. If the trapper has no wooden door to his cabin, and in it, instead of caching in a tree, keeps fish or bacon that may attract marauding wolverine, he will very probably leave his dogs on guard while he makes the round of the snares. Finding tracks about the shack when he came back for his noonday meal, Koot shouted sundry instructions into the mongrel's ear, emphasized them with a moccasin kick, picked up the sack in which he carried bait, twine, and traps, and set out in the evening to make the round of his snares, unaccompanied by the dog. Rabbit after rabbit he found, gray and white, hanging stiff and stark, dead from their own weight, strangled in the twined snares. Snares were set anew, the game strung over his shoulder, and Koot was walking through the gray gloaming for the cabin when that strange sense of feel told him that he was being followed. What was it? Could it be the dog? He whistled. He called it by name. In all the world there is nothing so ghostly silent, so deathly quiet as the swamp woods, muffled in the snow of midwinter, just at nightfall. By day, the grouse may utter a lonely cluck-cluck, or the snow buntings chirrup and twitter and flutter from drift to hedge-top, or the saucy jay shriek some scolding impudence. A squirrel may chatter out his noisy protest at some thief for approaching the nuts which lie cached under the rotten leaves at the foot of the tree, or the sun warmth may set the melting snow showering from the swan's down branches with a patter like rain. But at nightfall the frost has stilled the drip of thaw. Squirrel and bird are wrapped in the utter quiet of a gray darkness, and the marauders that fill midnight with sharp bark, shrill trembling scream, deep baying over the snow are not yet abroad in the woods. All is shadowless, stillness, a quiet that is audible. Koot turned sharply and whistled and called his dog. There wasn't a sound. Later, when the frost began to tighten, sap-frozen twigs would snap. The ice of the swamp, frozen like rock, would by and by crackle with the loud echo of a pistol shot, crackle and strike and break as if artillery were firing a fusillade and infantry shooters answering sharp. By and by, moon and stars and northern lights would set the shadows dancing, and the wail of the cougar would be echoed by the lifting scream of its mate. But now was not a sound, not a motion, not a shadow, only the noiseless stillness, the shadowless quiet, and the feel of something back where the darkness was gathering like a curtain in the bush. It might, of course, be only a silly long-ears loping under cover parallel to the man, looking with rabbit curiosity at this strange newcomer to the swamp home of the animal world. Koot's sense of feel told him that it wasn't a rabbit, but he tried to persuade himself that it was, the way a timid listener persuades herself that creaking floors are burglars. Thinking of his many snares, Koot smiled and walked on. Then it came again, that feel of something coursing behind the underbrush in the gloom of the gathering darkness. Koot stopped short and listened to a snow-muffled silence, to a desolating solitude that pressed in on the lonely hunter like the waves of a limitless sea round a drowning man. The sense of feel that is akin to brute instinct gave him the impression of a presence. Reason that is man's told him what it might be and what to do. Was he not carrying the snared rabbits over his shoulder? Some hungry flesh-eater, more bloodthirsty than courageous, was still hunting him for the food on his back, and only lacked the courage to attack. Koot drew a steel trap from his bag. He did not wish to waste a rabbit skin, so he baited the spring with a piece of fat bacon, smeared the trap, the snow, everything that he had touched with a rabbit skin, and walked home through the deepening dark to the little log cabin where a sharp woof-woof of welcome awaited him. That night, in addition to the skins across the doorway, Koot jammed logs athwart to keep the cold out, he told himself. Then he kindled a fire on the rough stone hearth built at one end of the cabin, and with a little clay pipe beneath his teeth, sat down on the stump chair to broil rabbit. The waist of the rabbit he had placed in traps outside the lodge. Once his dog sprang alert with pricked ears. Man and dog heard the sniff, sniff, sniff of some creature attracted to the cabin by the smell of broiling meat, and now rummaging at its own risk among the traps. And once, when Koot was stretched out on a bearskin before the fire, puffing at his pipe stem, drying his moccasins, and listening to the fusillade of frost rending ice and earth, a long, low, piercing wail rose and fell and died away. Instantly from the forest of the swamp came the answering scream, a lifting, tumbling, eldritch shriek. "I should have set 2 traps," says Koot. "They are out in pairs." Black is the flag of danger to the rabbit world. The antlered shadows of the naked poplar or the tossing arms of the restless pines, the rabbit knows to be harmless shadows unless their dapple of sun and shade conceals a brindled cat. But a shadow that walks and runs means to the rabbit a foe, so the wary trapper prefers to visit his snares at the hour of the short shadow. It did not surprise the trapper after he had heard the lifting wail from the swamp woods the night before that the bacon in the trap lay untouched. The still hunter that had crawled through the underbrush lured by the dead rabbits over Koot's shoulder wanted rabbit, not bacon, but at the nearest rabbit snare, where a poor dead prisoner had been torn from the twine, were queer padded prints in the snow, not of the rabbit's making. Koot stood looking at the telltale mark. The dog's ears were all a prick. So was Koot's sense of feel, but he couldn't make this thing out. There was no trail of approach or retreat. The padded print of the thief was in the snow as if the animal had dropped from the sky and gone back to the sky. Koot measured off 10 strides from the rifled snare and made a complete circuit round it. The rabbit runway cut athwart the snow circle, but no mark like that shuffling padded print. It isn't a wolverine, and it isn't a fisher, and it isn't a coyote, Koot told himself. The dog emitted stupid little sharp barks, looking everywhere and nowhere, as if he felt what he could neither see nor hear. Koot measured off 10 strides more from this circuit and again walked completely round the snare. Not even the rabbit runways cut this circle. The white man grows indignant when baffled, the Indian superstitious. The part that was white man in Koot sent him back to the scene in quick, jerky steps to scatter poisoned rabbit meat over the snow and set a trap in which he readily sacrificed a full-grown bunny. The part that was Indian set a world of old memories echoing, memories that were as much Koot's nature as the swarth of his skin, memories that Koot's mother and his mother's ancestors held of the fabulous man-eating wolf called the loup-garou, and the great white beaver father of all beavers, and all Indians that glided through the swamp mists at night like a ghost, and the monster grizzly that stalked with uncouth gambols through the dark, devouring, benighted hunters. This time, when the mongrel uttered his little sharp barkings that said as plainly as a dog could speak, "Something's somewhere. Be careful there. Oh, I'll be on to you in just 1 minute." Koot kicked the dog hard with plain anger, and his anger was at himself because his eyes and his ears failed to localize, to realize, to visualize what those little pricks and shivers tingling down to his fingertips meant. Then the civilized man came uppermost in Koot, and he marched off, very matter-of-fact, to the next snare. But if Koot's vision had been as acute as his sense of feel, and he had glanced up to the topmost spreading bough of a pine just above the snare, he might have detected, lying in a dapple of sun and shade, something with large owl eyes, something whose penciled ear tufts caught the first crisp of the man's moccasins over the snow crust. Then the ear tufts were laid flat back against a furry form hardly differing from the dapple of sun and shade. The big owl eyes closed to a tiny blinking slit that let out never a ray of telltale light. The big round body, mottled gray and white like the snowy tree, widened, stretched, flattened, till it was almost a part of the tossing pine bough. Only when the man and dog below the tree had passed far beyond did the penciled ears blink forward, and the owl eyes open, and the big body bunch out like a cat with elevated haunches ready to spring. But by and by the man's snares began to tell on the rabbits. They grew scarce and timid, and the thing that had rifled the rabbit snares grew hunger bold. One day when Koot and the dog were skimming across the billowy drifts, something black far ahead bounced up, caught a bunting on the wing, and with another bounce disappeared among the trees. Koot said one word, cat, and the dog was off full cry. Ever since he had heard that wailing call from the swamp woods, he had known that there were rival hunters, the keenest of all still hunters among the rabbits. Every day he came upon the trail of their ravages, rifled snares, dead squirrels, torn feathers, even the remains of a fox or a coon, and sometimes he could tell from the printings on the white page that the still hunter had been hunted full cry by coyote or timber wolf. Against these wolfish foes the cat had one sure refuge always, a tree. The hungry coyote might try to starve the bobcat into surrender, but just as often the bobcat could starve the coyote into retreat, for if a foolish rabbit darted past, what hungry coyote could help giving chase? The tree had even defeated both dog and man that first week when Koot could not find the cat. But a dog in full chase could follow the trail to a tree, and a man could shoot into the tree. As the rabbits decreased, Koot set out many traps for the bobcats now reckless with hunger, steel traps and deadfalls and pits and log pens with a live grouse clucking inside. The midwinter lull was a busy season for Koot. Towards March, the sun glare has produced a crust on the snow that is almost like glass. For Koot on his snowshoes this had no danger, but for the mongrel that was to draw the pelts back to the fort, the snow crust was more troublesome than glass. Where the crust was thick, with Koot leading the way, snowshoes and dog and toboggan glided over the drifts as if on steel runners. But in midday the crust was soft, and the dog went floundering through as if on thin ice, the sharp edge cutting his feet. Koot tied little buckskin sacks round the dog's feet and made a few more rounds of the swamp, but the crust was a sign that warned him it was time to prepare for the marten hunt. To leave his furs at the fort, he must cross the prairie while it was yet good traveling for the dog. Dismantling the little cabin, Koot packed the pelts on the toboggan, roped all tightly so there could be no spill from an upset, and putting the mongrel in the traces, led the way for the fort one night when the snow crust was hard as ice. The moon came up over the white fields in a great silver disk. Between the running man and the silver moon moved black, skulking forms, the foragers on their night hunt. Sometimes a fox loped over a drift, or a coyote rose ghostly from the snow, or timber wolves dashed from wooded ravines and stopped to look till Koot fired a shot that sent them galloping. In the dark that precedes daylight, Koot camped beside a grove of poplars. That is, he fed the dog a fish, whittled chips to make a fire and boil some tea for himself, then digging a hole in the drift with his snowshoe, laid the sleigh to windward and cuddled down between bearskins with the dog across his feet. Daylight came in a blinding glare of sunshine and white snow. The way was untrodden. Koot led at an ambling run, followed by the dog at a fast trot, so that the trees were presently left far on the offing, and the runners were out on the bare white prairie with never a mark, tree, or shrub to break the dazzling reaches of sunshine and snow from horizon to horizon. A man who is breaking the way must keep his eyes on the ground, and the ground was so blindingly bright that Koot began to see purple and yellow and red patches dancing wherever he looked on the snow. He drew his capote over his face to shade his eyes, but the pace and the sun grew so hot that he was soon running again, unprotected from the blistering light. Towards the afternoon, Koot knew that something had gone wrong. Some distance ahead, he saw a black object against the snow. On the unbroken white, it looked almost as big as a barrel, and seemed at least a mile away. Lowering his eyes, Koot let out a spurt of speed, and the next thing he knew, he had tripped his snowshoe and tumbled. Scrambling up, he saw that his stick had caught the web of his snowshoe. But where was the barrel for which he had been steering? There wasn't any barrel at all. The barrel was this black stick which hadn't been 50 yards away. Koot rubbed his eyes and noticed that black and red and purple patches were all over the snow. The drifts were heaving and racing after each other like waves on an angry sea. He did not go much farther that day, for every glint of snow scorched his eyes like a hot iron. He camped at the first bluff and made a poultice of cold tea leaves, which he laid across his blistered face for the night. Anyone who knows the tortures of snow blindness will understand why Koot did not sleep that night. It was a long night to the trapper, such a very long night that the sun had been up for 2 hours before its heat burned through the layers of his capote into his eyes and roused him from sheer pain. Then he sprang up, put up an ungauntlet hand, and knew from the heat of the sun that it was broad day. But when he took the bandage off his eyes, all he saw was a black curtain one moment, rockets and wheels and dancing patches of purple fire the next. Koot was no fool to become panicky and feeble from sudden peril. He knew that he was snowblind on a pathless prairie at least 2 days away from the fort. To wait until the snowblindness had healed would risk the few provisions that he had and perhaps expose him to a blizzard. The one rule of the trapper's life is to go ahead, let the going cost what it may, and drawing his capote over his face, Koot went on. The heat of the sun told him the directions, and when the sun went down, the crooning west wind, bringing thaw and snow crust, was his compass. And when the wind fell, the tufts of shrub growth sticking through the snow pointed to the warm south. Now he tied himself to his dog, and when he camped beside trees into which he had gone full crash before he knew they were there, he laid his gun beside the dog and sleigh. Going out the full length of his cord, he whittled the chips for his fire and found his way back by the cord. On the second day of his blindness, no sun came up, nor could he guide himself by the feel of the air, for there was no wind. It was one of the dull, dead, gray days that precede storms. How would he get his directions to set out? Memory of last night's travel might only lead him on the endless circling of the lost. Koot dug his snowshoe to the base of a tree, found moss, felt it growing on only one side of the tree, knew that side must be the shady, cold side, and so took his bearings from what he thought was the north. Koot said the only time that he knew any fear was on the evening of the last day. The atmosphere boded storm. The fort lay in a valley. Somewhere between Koot and that valley ran a trail. What if he had crossed the trail? What if the storm came and wiped out the trail before he could reach the fort? All day, Whiskey Jack and Snow Bunting and Fox scurried from his presence. But this night in the dusk, when he felt forward on his hands and knees for the expected trail, the wild creatures seemed to grow bolder. He imagined that he felt the coyotes closer than on the other nights. And then the fearful thought came that he might have passed the trail unheeding. Should he turn back? Afraid to go forward or back, Koot sank on the ground, unhooded his face, and tried to force his eyes to see. The pain brought biting, salty tears. It was quite useless. Either the night was very dark or the eyes were very blind. And then, white man or Indian, who shall say which came uppermost, Koot cried out to the Great Spirit. In mockery back came the saucy scold of a jay. But that was enough for Koot. It was prompt answer to his prayer. For where do the jays quarrel and fight and flutter but on the trail? Running eagerly forward, the trapper felt the ground. The rutted marks of a jumper sleigh cut the hard crust. With a shout, Koot headed down the sloping path to the valley where lay the fur post, the low-hanging smoke of whose chimneys his eager nostrils had already sniffed. End of section 15.